The streets of Baku have always carried a reputation for being ruthless, a circuit where the high-speed straights, narrow walls, and complete lack of forgiveness for error make it one of the most feared races on the Formula One calendar. Over the years, this street track has witnessed champions rise to glory while others have seen their dreams and even careers fall apart with just one misjudged corner. The 2025 Azerbaijan Grand Prix has now etched itself into that same legacy. But perhaps even more significantly, it might be remembered as the weekend that changed the trajectory of the entire championship season. Max Verstappen was flawless, his Red Bull looking glued to the tarmac with unmatched precision and control. But while he delivered one of his most commanding victories in recent memory, all eyes were not on him. Instead, the spotlight was fixed on McLaren and the man who came into Baku carrying the weight of a championship lead, Oscar Piastri, who entered the weekend with everything to lose. Calm, composed, and consistent all season, Piastri had built a healthy 31-point cushion over his closest rival and teammate, Lando Norris. On paper, he looked unshakable. But Formula One has a cruel way of testing even the strongest characters, and what unfolded in Baku was nothing short of catastrophic. From a botched start to a desperate attempt at recovery that ended in a violent crash into the barriers, Piastri's weekend imploded before his eyes. What had been composure throughout the season suddenly cracked. His confidence appeared shaken, and the psychological armor he had built began to show its first real weakness. Yet this was not just a story about a crash. It went deeper, revealing truths about McLaren, about Piastri himself, and about Verstappen's sudden late-season resurgence that may well alter the championship battle. Before diving deeper into this analysis, it's worth noting that the Azerbaijan Grand Prix did not simply give us another winner. It provided one of those defining weekends that remind us why this sport is as much about the mind as it is about machinery. Let's begin with the cold facts of the race. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix of 2025 ended with Verstappen crossing the finish line in first place, securing what many have called a Grand Slam weekend. Pole position, every lap led, and the fastest lap of the race. It was total domination, and Baku belonged entirely to him. Behind Verstappen, George Russell put in a remarkable performance for Mercedes, taking second place, while Carlos Sainz shocked the paddock by dragging his Williams to a podium finish in third. Just off the podium, young talent Kimi Antonelli claimed fourth in what was perhaps his most complete Formula One weekend yet. The headlines right after the race celebrated Verstappen's brilliance, but the true drama, the story that captured everyone's imagination, came not at the front but in the brutal collapse of Oscar Piastri's weekend. For Piastri, the unraveling began well before Sunday's race even started. Having crashed during qualifying, he was forced to start ninth on the grid, his lowest starting position of the entire season. That mistake alone had already placed him under enormous pressure. McLaren's engineers worked tirelessly overnight, even replacing the chassis to ensure his car was ready. But as the lights went out on Sunday, the unthinkable happened. Piastri jumped the start, then stalled almost immediately, leaving him stranded and tumbling down the order to last place before the first corner. The 5-second penalty that came for the false start hardly mattered. The damage had already been done. From that moment on, it felt as if fate had already decided to punish him further. By lap 5, in his desperate bid to claw his way back into contention, Piastri pushed too hard into turn 5, locked up, and slammed into the barriers. His McLaren was destroyed, his race was over, and his championship campaign suddenly looked vulnerable for the first time in over a year. To put that into perspective, Piastri had not suffered a single retirement in 35 consecutive races, stretching all the way back to Miami in 2024. His entire reputation had been built on being the ice-cool operator, the methodical and unshakable young talent who rarely made mistakes. And yet, in Baku, we saw the exact opposite. What the world witnessed was not the composed Piastri of old, but a rattled driver, one who crumbled under the unique pressure cooker that defines the streets of Baku. The implosion left the paddock stunned. On the surface, the retirement cost Piastri just 6 points in the championship standings. Lando Norris, who finished 7th after his own struggles, could only reduce the gap from 31 to 25 points. Mathematically, Piastri still holds a commanding lead with 7 races left in the season. But championships are not won on paper. They are shaped by momentum, by psychology, and by how a driver reacts under fire. And in Baku, momentum swung violently away from Piastri and toward Verstappen. For Verstappen, this wasn't just another victory to add to his already legendary career. This was a statement to the entire paddock that he is far from finished. In back-to-back weekends, in Italy and Azerbaijan, Verstappen has reminded everyone why he remains the predator lurking in the shadows. Though he still sits 69 points adrift, the mathematics are clear. With 199 points still available over the final 7 races, one strong run of form could catapult him right back into the fight. More importantly, the psychological impact of his resurgence cannot be overstated. If Verstappen wins again in Singapore, the narrative shifts dramatically, transforming this season from a 2-horse McLaren battle into a 3-way dogfight that could define the sport for years to come. The McLaren itself has also come under scrutiny. Both Piastri and Norris admitted after the race that while the car is blisteringly fast at its best, it remains unpredictable and extremely difficult to drive at the absolute limit. On tight, punishing circuits like Baku, that unpredictability becomes a major liability. Norris himself had a poor weekend, never looking like a serious podium threat, and afterward, his frustration boiled over in his post-race comments. He spoke openly about missed opportunities and not being perfect, remarks that suggested a creeping tension inside the McLaren garage. While the team may be on course to dominate the Constructors' Championship, the battle between their drivers is anything but straightforward, and cracks are beginning to show. Internally, Baku may have been more damaging to McLaren than the results table suggests. They came into the weekend with an opportunity to tighten their grip on the season. Instead, they left with far more questions than answers. Norris once again failed to capitalize when Piastri faltered. Piastri himself looked vulnerable for the first time all year, and Verstappen, who only weeks ago seemed to be fading out of the championship picture, suddenly has fresh motivation. It's not just a bad weekend. It could be the moment the psychological balance of the title fight shifted. The imagery of Piastri after the crash added another layer to the narrative. Cameras caught him sitting behind the safety barriers, helmet off, reclining with his feet propped up while watching the race feed on his phone and casually eating a banana. On social media, the image exploded into memes and jokes, painting him as a spectator rather than a competitor. But beneath the humor, that picture was symbolic. It told the story of a driver stripped of control, forced to watch helplessly as his rivals carried on. For someone leading the World Championship, that image was not just embarrassing. It was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes can reverse in Formula One. And this brings us to the psychological side, where championships are often truly decided. At just 24 years old, in only his 3rd season as a title contender, Piastri has been praised for his remarkable composure. Until now, he seemed immune to pressure, capable of shutting out distractions and delivering consistent results. But Baku was different. The false start, the over-pushing, the crashes in both qualifying and the race. These weren't just physical mistakes. They were mental lapses. Once that aura of perfection cracks, rivals begin to sense weakness, and blood is in the water. Contrast this with Verstappen, a driver who has lived through title fights, setbacks, and pressure cookers before. He knows exactly how to exploit even the smallest opening. His win in Baku wasn't only about raw pace. It was about resilience, about sending a clear message to McLaren and the rest of the field that he is still capable of rewriting the narrative late in the season. For Piastri, that is perhaps the most dangerous development of all. Of course, Norris cannot be overlooked. At just 25 points behind, he is essentially one race victory away from drawing level with Piastri in the standings. Yet what becomes clearer with every race is that Norris might not be able to beat his teammate outright unless McLaren gives him